Torrance, California. April 1972. Saturday night. The kind of night that arrives without announcement, wearing the ordinary clothes of any other Saturday evening in Southern California, warm air, the smell of food, the low-level pleasant noise of a neighborhood restaurant doing modest business on a weekend. Nothing in the quality of the evening suggests that it is carrying something inside it. Nothing in the way the light falls through the windows or the way the customers talk to each other or the way the kitchen sounds from the counter gives any indication that the next 20 minutes are going to become the story that people tell about this night for the next 50 years. Chuck Norris had opened the restaurant 6 months earlier with the combination of genuine hope and pragmatic uncertainty that attaches to every small business opened by someone who has spent their entire adult life building expertise in something else entirely. He had spent years in competitive karate, world-level titles, a record that had established him at the absolute peak of American martial arts competition, and had discovered in the transition to business ownership that none of those skills translated in any direct way to managing staff, ordering inventory, managing cash flow, building the regular customer base that small restaurants run on. The transition had been harder and more interesting than he had anticipated. What had helped, unexpectedly, was the film. His role as Colt in Way of the Dragon, the American fighter who faces Bruce Lee in the film's climactic sequence at the Coliseum, had given him a face outside the martial arts community. People who had never attended a karate tournament, who had no particular interest in martial arts as a discipline, came to the restaurant because they had seen the film and the specific human reality of that sequence had made them curious about the man who had been in it. Some came once out of curiosity and left. Some became regulars. The film had done for the restaurant what no tournament title could do, which was make him visible to people who had no reason to care about karate but had reasons to care about the specific story of two men performing at the edge of what they were capable of. That visibility was translating into something real, something that might become durable. Tonight the restaurant had maybe 20 customers spread across the tables and counter stools. The warm ordinary energy of a Saturday evening that expects nothing from itself beyond being exactly what it is. The kitchen was producing the honest, unpretentious food that Chuck had staked the place on. The conversations at the tables had the easy quality of people who had somewhere comfortable to be and were being there without urgency. Bruce Lee was at the counter. He was in Los Angeles for the weekend, meetings connected to his career, which was entering a phase of acceleration that everyone around him could feel before it was fully visible. Enter the Dragon had finished filming. The early consensus among people who had seen cuts and understood what they were looking at was that it was going to make him one of the most recognizable people on the planet. His meetings were about the shape of what came after, the projects and deals and decisions about how to manage an imminent transformation in public standing that would arrive with the force of something that had been building for years and was now about to break. He had come by the restaurant to see his friend. To eat a burger. To offer the kind of presence that does not announce itself as support but is simply the fact of someone who believes in what you are doing and has taken the time to show up in it with you. He was in regular clothes. Dark jacket, dark trousers. Nothing marking him as anything other than a man at a counter on a Saturday evening. The customers who did not know who he was saw exactly that, a small Chinese man eating at the counter of a burger place in Torrance. The customers who did know were stealing glances and finding the experience different from what watching the films had prepared them for. Smaller and larger simultaneously. Smaller because he was simply a man eating at a counter. Larger because everything the films had communicated about him was visible in the specific quality of how he occupied space, the economy of movement, the quality of awareness, the sense of someone for whom every room has already been read before the act of entering it is complete. He and Chuck were talking across the counter with the easy unhurried quality of people who have known each other long enough that conversation does not need to be about anything specific. Who have shared something real in training and on screen and find in that shared reality a specific ease that does not require maintenance. Chuck was behind the counter, occasionally checking on the kitchen, occasionally clearing a cup, doing the small constant work that restaurant owners do when their restaurants are open, the work that is never entirely finished because there is always something that needs attention. The restaurant was warm and ordinary and entirely unaware of what the next 20 minutes were going to require of it. Then the door opened. It hit the wall behind it with a sound that carried information beyond its volume. Information about the kind of people who had produced it and what their presence in this space was likely to mean. And every person in the restaurant received that information in the same instant and processed it in the same way, which was to go still and look toward the door and feel the specific change in the temperature of the evening that certain arrivals produce without requiring any further action to establish themselves. 5 men. Leather jackets with motorcycle club patches. Dark jeans, heavy boots, the specific physical ease of men who have spent years in situations where their size reorganizes the space around them and have come to experience this reorganization as simply the correct order of things. All five large. All five carrying themselves with the practiced confidence of people whose operating model has never been seriously challenged. The room reorganized. Conversation stopped. Customers turned in their chairs with the specific quality of people who are assessing an exit strategy while trying not to make the assessment visible. The temperature of the Saturday evening changed irrevocably. The leader walked to the counter. The four others moved through the restaurant with the practiced spatial logic of people who had done this many times before, positioning themselves near the exits, near the tables, covering the angles of movement in the specific way that communicates without words that the conversation at the counter is the only conversation that matters and that their role is to ensure everyone present absorbs the lesson it provides. His name was Bull. Not a given name but an earned one, the kind of name that is a precise description of an operating method. 6'4", somewhere around 280 pounds, the kind of mass that begins as muscle and accumulates supplementary weight over years without losing the underlying strength that made it useful. He had been running a protection operation in this territory for a decade. The model was straightforward. Businesses paid a monthly amount in exchange for not being damaged. Most businesses paid because the calculation was not complicated, the cost of compliance was lower than the cost of resistance, and the cost of resistance was not abstract. It was broken windows and broken equipment and customers who stopped coming and businesses that died. Chuck watched Bull's men position themselves and assessed with the directness of someone who has spent years in genuine competition and understands physical threat as a concrete thing rather than a concept. He set down the rag he was holding, stood straight, and said without performance, "Yeah, I'm the owner. Chuck Norris. What can I do for you?" Bull explained. The territory. The monthly payment. The protection it purchased. The alternative if the payment was not made. He presented it as information rather than negotiation, the description of existing reality rather than a proposal subject to discussion. He spoke with the flat confidence of someone who had delivered this speech hundreds of times and had never encountered a response that required him to adjust it. He was about to encounter one. Chuck said, "I'm not paying you anything." He said it simply and without performance. This was his restaurant. He had worked for it, saved for it, built it across months of hard work and uncertainty. He was not giving money to people who hadn't earned it. If they wanted money, they could work for it. They should leave and not come back and not threaten honest business owners who were trying to build something real. The words landed with the specific weight of something true that everyone in the room knew was true. Bull's face showed what it showed when people said no, a brief confused passage through the disbelief of someone whose operating assumptions had just been contradicted by reality, followed by the anger that fills the space where certainty used to be. He turned to his men. Told them to start breaking things. Start with the back. Make sure the owner understood what happened when people didn't pay. The four bikers began to move. Customers pushed back from their tables. People moved toward the exits with the urgent quality of people who have made the correct calculation. That involvement in this situation carries costs that no one is obligated to absorb on behalf of a stranger's dispute, that being elsewhere is immediately and obviously preferable to being here. The restaurant was emptying with the speed of a space whose occupants have collectively decided that self-preservation is the appropriate response to what has just arrived. This was exactly what Bull's operation ran on. This collective withdrawal. This rational decision that discretion was the correct response to his presence. It had worked without exception for a decade. It was working now. The restaurant was emptying. Then Bruce Lee stood up from the counter. He did not scramble. He did not move toward the exit. He stood with the specific unhurried quality that characterized everything he did, and he watched Bull's men positioning themselves, and he read the situation with the complete rapid analysis that 2 decades of training had made instantaneous and automatic. Then he said, in a voice that was not loud and not theatrical but that carried through the restaurant with the authority of a voice that does not require volume to communicate seriousness, "Stop." One word. And everyone stopped. Everyone looked at him. Not because of the volume, but because of something in the quality of the word itself, something in the specific information carried by the person saying it that made the word function differently than the same word said by someone else would have functioned. Bull turned with genuine confusion and looked at this small Chinese man in regular clothes at the counter. Looked at someone who appeared, to anyone without the relevant information, to be exactly what he appeared to be, a customer, nobody, someone who had made the inexplicable decision to insert himself into a situation that had nothing to do with him. "Who are you?" Bull said. "You're some customer. Some Chinese guy eating a burger. Sit down. Shut up. Mind your business or you get hurt too. Easy choice. Smart choice. Bruce Lee did not sit down. "This is my business," he said. "Chuck is my friend. You're threatening my friend. That makes it my business. That makes you someone I need to deal with. So I'm telling you, leave now. Walk out. Don't come back. Don't threaten, don't extort, don't destroy. Just leave. That is the only option that ends well for you tonight." The bikers laughed. Bull laughed loudest, the genuine laugh of someone who has been presented with something they find authentically funny, which in this case was a small man in regular clothes issuing instructions to 5 large men who had just emptied a restaurant through the simple fact of their presence. The absurdity of it was real from where they were standing, and the laughter communicated that reality completely. Chuck came around the counter. He moved to Bruce's side and spoke quietly, urgently. "Bruce, don't. Let them do it. I'll rebuild. It's not worth getting hurt. 5 of them, please, sit down, let this happen and we'll deal with it through proper channels afterward. I don't want you hurt over protection money for my restaurant." Bruce shook his head. "No. This is exactly when we fight. When people who use violence to take from honest people think they can walk in anywhere and destroy what someone else built. When they think everyone will just clear out and let it happen. This is the moment you stand. This is when you show them that not everyone is afraid. Not everyone complies. Not everyone surrenders what they've built to avoid an unpleasant evening. This ends here." Bull's patience completed itself. He said it was the last chance. "Sit down, shut up, let the evening proceed as designed, or get hurt. Hospital hurt. Not a negotiation. Not a suggestion. A description of what was about to happen." Bruce stepped forward. Not away from the situation, forward into it, closing the distance between himself and Bull, closing the distance between himself and all 5 of them. And he said, "I've told you to leave. You didn't. Now you deal with the consequences. Now you learn that threatening people has costs that don't appear in the calculation you've been running for 10 years. The 7 seconds began. Bull moved fast for his size, faster than his mass suggested was possible, with the practiced aggression of someone who had used his physical tools in genuine situations many times and knew how to deploy them. He reached for Bruce's shirt, going for the grab that would allow him to lift and throw, the visual demonstration that settled matters without requiring elaboration, the move that had worked in 100 similar situations. One hand closing on the fabric of the jacket and the weight of 280 pounds driving forward behind it. Bruce's hand was already moving when Bull reached. The Wing Chun trap intercepted Bull's wrist at the specific point and angle where the strength behind the grab became something that could be redirected rather than resisted, not blocking the force but redirecting it, using the mass and the momentum as material rather than obstacle. Converting what Bull brought into a lever that worked against him rather than for him. Bull's size was not helping him here. It was giving Bruce more to work with. Bull tried to pull back. Couldn't. Bruce's other hand came forward. A palm strike to the solar plexus, measured and placed with precision, targeted at the anatomical location most efficiently disrupted by concentrated force. Not the maximum he could generate. Enough. The specific amount the situation required. Bull's breath left him completely. His diaphragm locked, his eyes widened, and he stood there held by a man who weighed less than 60% of what he weighed, unable to breathe, unable to move, the 280 pounds of operational capability temporarily suspended by the interruption of the one biological process that everything else depended on. 3 seconds had elapsed. The 4 remaining bikers were already moving. They came at Bruce and Chuck simultaneously, distributing their numbers between the 2 men with the tactical logic of people who have learned that overwhelming through volume is more reliable than engaging at even numbers when the situation allows otherwise. Chuck took 2. He was a world karate champion with thousands of hours of competitive preparation, and the preparation was not decorative. It was functional, tested under genuine competitive pressure, refined through years of encounters with serious opponents in the specific context of genuine combat sport at the highest level. He moved with the economy of someone who has spent that time developing techniques for generating maximum effect with minimum waste and has learned through repetition which movements work and which are theory. The first biker came in with his size and momentum, the same model as Bull, used the mass, used the forward drive, overwhelmed through physical advantage. Chuck's foot caught his knee at the precise anatomical point where a sidekick applied perpendicular to the joint's operational axis creates a force the joint was not designed to absorb. The knee hyperextended. The biker went down with a sound that communicated structural damage and stayed there. The second threw a wide looping punch, telegraphed in the wind-up, telegraphed in the shoulder rotation, telegraphed in the specific quality of commitment that big punches announce before they arrive. Chuck slipped under it, inside the arc, where the punch had no power left in it, and came back with a reverse punch to the ribs, full power, placed with the precision of someone who has thrown that technique thousands of times under competitive pressure, driven by the hip rotation that converts a punch from an arm movement into a whole-body event. Followed immediately with an elbow to the back of the head. The second biker hit the floor face first and did not get up. 5 seconds had elapsed. Chuck Norris, world karate champion, had neutralized 2 experienced, physically capable street fighters in 2 seconds. Not because they were weak or slow or unprepared. Because they encountered someone whose preparation existed on a level entirely different from anything they had previously faced. The collision between genuine training and untrained size produces outcomes that are not close regardless of how large the size is, and both bikers had just learned this in the most direct way available. Bruce handled the other 2 simultaneously. They came at him coordinated, 2 angles designed to limit a single target's ability to address both at once. Sound tactics. The correct approach against most opponents, denying the target the ability to focus on one threat without creating exposure to the other. Bruce Lee was not most opponents. The first threw a strike at his head from the left. Bruce's movement in response was so small that multiple people in the restaurant who were watching would later report being uncertain about whether they had actually seen it happen. A minimal shift, a few inches, that placed him outside the strike's trajectory while simultaneously positioning him to respond. Not evading the attack to create distance and then countering from distance. Moving offline into the position that made the counter available without any wasted intermediate steps. His hand came forward and struck the throat with the specific light precision of someone who has selected the exact force required for the exact result, not more, not less. The biker's hands went to his throat as his body reassigned its operational priorities from attacking to the more fundamental task of maintaining the airway. The second tried to tackle. The correct instinct, take Bruce to the ground where the mass differential becomes decisive, where 220 pounds on top of 135 pounds resolves itself through physics regardless of technique. He committed forward with his full weight, the full momentum of the charge behind the attempt. Bruce's knee came up and met his face at the precise moment of maximum commitment, timed for the instant when the momentum was fully engaged, when the ability to adjust or abort was zero, when the entire weight of the man was moving forward and could not be recalled. The nose broke. The tackle stopped. The biker went down. 7 seconds. From the moment the bikers began moving to the moment all 4 were on the floor, 7 seconds. Bull was still standing, partially breathing again, the diaphragm spasm releasing in the specific slow way it always releases, and he had watched his entire crew go down with an efficiency that made the whole enterprise look predetermined. As though the outcome had been established before the first person moved and the 7 seconds had been simply the process of confirming what was already true. Bruce looked at him. He was not breathing differently than he had been before any of this started. His expression had not changed since he stood up from the counter stool. He said, "You done?" In the flat, honest voice of someone making a genuine inquiry. Ready to accept that this restaurant is not part of your operation, that Chuck doesn't pay, that you don't come back? Or do you need more information? Bull looked at his men on the floor. Looked at Bruce. Looked at Chuck, who was standing ready and had just put 2 experienced fighters down in 5 seconds and was visibly and completely prepared to continue providing whatever additional education the situation required. He made the calculation. His pride said fight. The intelligence that had kept him alive and operational for a decade said leave. And men who survive long enough to develop functioning instincts have learned which voice to listen to when those 2 things conflict, because the voice that says fight is the voice of ego and the voice that says leave is the voice of pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is almost always right. This isn't over, Bull said. In the voice of someone trying to sound dangerous while retreating from a situation that has thoroughly demonstrated where the actual danger in the room was located. Bruce stepped close to him and looked up at the man who had 6 inches and 140 pounds on him and said it clearly and without drama, "If you come back, the result will be the same, only worse." This time I was restraining myself. I was trying to stop you, not hurt you. I was using the minimum force required to end the threat. Next time I will not make that distinction. So make the smart choice. Stay away. Don't test what I am capable of when I am actually trying. Bull looked at Bruce's eyes and found in them the specific information that made the correct decision unavoidable, not aggression, not threat performance, not the warning energy of someone hoping to bluff. Just the completely flat, completely genuine, completely certain communication of a person who means exactly what they are saying and has just provided irrefutable evidence that they have the capacity to follow through on it completely. He told his men to get up. They struggled to their feet, helping each other, moving toward the door with the diminished quality of men who have encountered something they were not prepared for and are in the early stages of processing what the encounter means about everything they thought they understood about how the world worked. They left. The bikes started outside, loud engines, men projecting through noise the power they had just demonstrated they did not have in this specific context. The sound receded down the street and was gone. The restaurant held its silence for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Not enthusiastic performance applause, the specific genuine sound of people expressing something real with their hands in response to something real that happened in front of them. It built into something sustained and unambiguous. Bullies had come to destroy what an honest man built. They had been stopped. They had left worse than they arrived. Chuck looked at Bruce. He said Bruce hadn't needed to do that. He was becoming the biggest star in the world. He had everything to lose and nothing specific to gain. It was not his fight. He could have walked out with everyone else and nobody would have said anything because nobody expected anything different. Bruce said, "That's exactly why I had to do it. Because they think fame makes you soft. Because proving that Bruce Lee is real matters, and proving it in moments like this, unscripted, unfilmed, with no audience except the people who happen to be here, is the only proof that counts. And because you're my friend. That's the simpler reason. Friends stand together." That's what this was. An older man approached them from near the back of the restaurant. Perhaps 60 years old, in working clothes, with the face of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just felt the weight shift unexpectedly. He introduced himself. He owned a furniture shop 2 streets over. Custom work, built over decades, genuine craftsmanship. He had been paying Bull for 15 years. $500 a month, every month, for 15 years. He did the arithmetic out loud as he spoke. $90,000 given to Bull's operation because he had been afraid and because in 15 years he had never seen anyone resist and win. Until tonight. He said, "You freed me. Bull won't come back here. He knows you can beat him. He knows this neighborhood has people who won't tolerate what he's been running here. When word gets out about tonight, and it will, because stories like this always travel, other businesses will stop paying too. You changed something tonight. Not just for me, for everyone who's been handing money over every month because they had no reason to believe there was another option. You showed them the other option exists." His voice carried 15 years in a handful of sentences. Several of the customers nearby were nodding with the specific quality of people who recognized the story from the inside. Word moved through the neighborhood the following day exactly as Chuck had expected and the furniture maker had predicted. The story traveled through the martial arts community and through every network that connected to anyone who had been in the restaurant or knew someone who had. The details expanded in transmission the way details expand when stories are real enough to deserve repeated telling. 5 bikers became more, 7 seconds became instantaneous, the specific techniques took on additional drama in the retelling. But the core held because the people who were there that Saturday night were consistent in what they reported. 2 men. 5 bikers. Approximately 7 seconds. No meaningful harm to the 2 men. All 5 bikers on the floor or retreating. And beneath the numbers, the detail that everyone who told the story returned to eventually, the detail that outlasted all the others, was the moment before the 7 seconds. The moment when Bruce Lee stood up from the counter stool and said stop. When everyone else in the restaurant was moving toward the exit and he was moving toward something else. The moment when the calculation that the situation was designed to produce, that compliance was easier than resistance, that self-preservation was the only rational response, that one person standing against 5 was not a calculation that could come out differently than mathematics suggested, failed to produce the expected result because the person doing the calculating was working from different premises than the situation assumed. Bull did not come back. His crew had absorbed physical damage and his reputation had absorbed something harder to recover from, the specific damage that comes from being seen to fail publicly in front of witnesses who would talk. The fear that his operation ran on required regular reinforcement, and what had happened at Chuck's restaurant was the precise opposite of reinforcement. Within months he had relocated his operation to different territory, different targets, people who did not have the specific combination of preparation and friendship that had produced the outcome on that Saturday evening. His operation in the Torrance neighborhood collapsed without him. The businesses that had been paying discovered that their years of compliance had been optional all along, contingent entirely on no one being willing to demonstrate otherwise. Someone had demonstrated otherwise. Chuck's restaurant flourished in the months that followed. Not immediately, not without the continued work that small businesses require, but with a momentum that April had contributed to in ways that were real if difficult to precisely quantify. People came specifically because of the story. A restaurant where Bruce Lee had stood up to 5 bikers and Chuck Norris had fought beside him. Where what the films showed had been proved real in the most direct possible way. No cameras. No choreography. No controlled cinematic context. Just 2 men and 5 bikers and 7 seconds in a small restaurant in Torrance on a Saturday night. It became something beyond a neighborhood burger place, a destination with a specific story attached to it that made it memorable in a city full of places competing to be remembered. Enter the Dragon opened later that year to the response that the early consensus had anticipated. Bruce Lee became an international phenomenon in the fullest sense, his name and face recognized across every market where the film reached, which was essentially every market the film could reach. And the night at the Torrance restaurant became part of the larger account of who he was. One piece of evidence among many that what the films communicated was not fabricated. That the speed and the technique and the specific quality of presence that the films captured were real and available in any context, planned or unplanned, filmed or witnessed by 20 people in a burger place on a Saturday night. Bruce Lee died in July 1973, 15 months after that Saturday. 3 months after Enter the Dragon finished filming. Weeks before it opened. He was 32 years old and had spent his entire conscious life building toward something that was just beginning to become fully visible to the world when the world lost access to it. He was 32 years old and had already changed martial arts permanently, had already changed what was possible for Asian actors in Western film, had already produced work that would continue producing its effects for the next 50 years and counting. Chuck Norris spent the following decades building his own career, his own legacy, his own account of what it meant to have known Bruce Lee. And every time someone asked him to describe who Bruce Lee actually was, not the image, not the films, but the person, he returned to the same story. He returned to that Saturday night in Torrance because it contained, in the specific events of a single evening, the complete answer to the question. He said, Bruce didn't have to do it. He was becoming the biggest star in the world. He had everything to lose. 5 bikers in a restaurant in Torrance had nothing to do with his career, his safety, his interests, his rational calculation of where his evening should go. He could have walked out with everyone else and the decision would have been defensible and correct by every standard that the situation was designed to appeal to. But he stood up. He stepped forward. He said, this is my business too because you're my friend. He put himself between his friend's livelihood and the people who had come to destroy it, without hesitation, without calculation, without the performance of courage that is different from courage itself. And then he demonstrated in 7 seconds that the decision had not been reckless, that it had been made by someone who knew exactly what they were capable of and had no confusion about whether the situation was within the range of things they could handle. That's what I carry, Chuck said. Not the technique, not the speed, not the 7 seconds. The choice. The fraction of a second when everyone else was going one way and Bruce went the other. That fraction of a second is where the story lives. That's who he was. The furniture maker paid off the last installment of a debt he no longer owed to anyone on the morning after the night at Chuck's restaurant and never paid another one. 30 years later, in an interview about the neighborhood's history, he described the evening in specific detail, as people describe things they have returned to many times in their minds and have found each time still exactly as they remembered it. He said, I had given $90,000 across 15 years to a man who had never built anything, never made anything, never contributed anything except the threat that made the payments feel necessary. And then one evening I watched a small man stand up from a counter stool and say stop, and in 7 seconds demonstrate that the threat was not as large as it had seemed in 15 years of monthly envelopes. I stopped being afraid that night, he said. Not just of bull. Of the idea that honest people are always at the mercy of dishonest ones. Of the idea that compliance is always the rational choice. I watched Bruce Lee make a different calculation and prove with his body that the calculation was correct. That changed something in me that has not changed back. Some things exceed what language can hold precisely because they happen faster than language can move. 7 seconds in a restaurant in Torrance, California. The choice that preceded them by 1 moment. And the 50 years that have followed them, carrying the story forward in the only way true things travel, from the people who were there to the people who needed to hear it, arriving with its full weight intact, unchanged by the distance.